domination, above domination, and to anchor international peace and security in justice, cooperation, and collective responsibility. That choice was enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations, a solemn covenant that remains humanity's most enduring promise to prevent conflict and resolve disputes peacefully. And as we mark the 80th anniversary of the UN Charter, this moment demands more than commemoration. It calls for honest reflection and renewed resolve at a time when conflicts are multiplying and trust among nations is eroding and adherence to international law is increasingly selective. The central question before us is not whether the Charter remains relevant, but whether we are prepared to apply it with consistency, courage, and political will that it requires. So, colleagues, when we speak of reimagining conflict prevention and dispute resolution, we must be clear. This is not a call to rewrite the Charter or reinterpret its principles. The Charter does not need reinvention. Its wisdom has endured over the last 8 decades. What must be reimagined is how we apply it in practice and how we operationalize its tools early, impartially, and effectively in a complex and rapidly evolving world. Therefore, reimagining means restoring prevention to the heart of international peace and security, acting before disputes escalate into crises and humanitarian suffering, and privileging mediation over militarization, diplomacy over coercion, and international law over power politics. The Pact for the Future, adopted at the Summit of the Future in 2024, reinforced this approach by reaffirming conflict prevention, trust building, and inclusive dialogue as pillars, central pillars of multilateralism, aligned squarely with the Charter's original vision. This renewed commitment is most compellingly reflected in landmark Security Council Resolution 2788. It was adopted by consensus during Pakistan's presidency of the Security Council last July. It represents a conscious and collective decision to recalibrate the United Nations approach to peace and security by restoring the peaceful settlement of disputes to its rightful place at the heart of the UN Charter. It reinforces the primacy of dialogue, negotiation, mediation, and other Chapter 6 mechanisms while underscoring the responsibility of the Security Council and its member states to utilize these tools at an early stage to prevent disputes from escalating into conflict. Importantly, Resolution 2788 strengthens the preventive dimension of Council's work by calling for enhanced use of good offices, mediation support, and confidence building measures, and by encouraging closer cooperation between the Council, the Secretary General, the regional and sub regional organizations. It recognizes that sustainable peace cannot be imposed through coercive means, but must be built through inclusive political processes that address the root causes of conflict. Above all, it delivers a timely and unambiguous message. Prevention is not optional, the dialogue is not a concession, and the peaceful settlement of disputes remains not only relevant but indispensable in navigating today's increasingly fragmented and volatile international landscape. Colleagues, the credibility of the UN Charter is ultimately tested in its application to long standing disputes, particularly where political sensitivities are high but legal and moral clarity is unmistakable. The situations of Palestine and Jammu and Kashmir are among the most stark examples. The Jammu and Kashmir dispute could have been a successful example of the application of Charter provisions for pacific settlement of disputes. The Security Council acted effectively in the late 40s and 1950s by providing the relevant framework for peacefully resolving this dispute, providing for self determination, but it remained unimplemented to this day. And similarly, the situation in Palestine continues to underscore the grave consequences of selective application of international law. The prolonged denial of the inalienable rights of Palestinian people, including their right to self determination, perpetuates injustice and fuels instability far beyond the region. In both cases, the failure to implement the relevant Security Council resolutions remains one of the most enduring challenges to maintenance of international peace and security. So, colleagues, as we commemorate 80 years of the UN Charter, let us reaffirm a simple but profound truth: peace cannot be selective, and justice cannot be deferred indefinitely. The authority of the Charter rests on its consistent and impartial application, especially in situations where principled multilateral action is most needed. So let us reimagine conflict prevention and resolution by applying the Charter as it was intended, faithfully, courageously, and without exception. I look forward to a rich and substantive discussion and to the insights of our distinguished panels and other worthy participants. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, for this thoughtful framing and really setting the tone for today's discussion, reminding us that prevention is a uh, charter obligation. Dialogue is not a concession, and selective application of the international law weakens the entire multilateral system. With this perspective in mind, let us turn to our distinguished panel. My name is Saima Salim. I'll be moderating this panel discussion. In order to cover different aspects and dimension of this topic, we will be asking questions from each panelist, and we would request them to respond to those questions. Our first speaker is Ms. Martha Emma Kobe, Assistant Secretary General for Africa, who brings extensive experience in preventive diplomacy, mediation, and regional peace efforts. Uh, Ms. Martha, in what ways can preventive diplomacy and mediation be strengthened in the light of Security Council Resolution 2788 and within the broader vision of the Pact of the Future to advance the peaceful settlement of disputes? You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Good afternoon to you all, Excellencies and distinguished delegates. Let me start by thanking the Permanent Mission of Pakistan and Global Peace Chain for convening us for this important and timely discussion, especially within the context of the 80th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations. Indeed, as has been expressed in the concept note, the global landscape has certainly changed profoundly since 1945. And the ongoing geopolitical transformation is having a major impact on conflict trends and contexts, as well as our collective peacemaking. So we are witnessing the largest number of conflicts since 1945 and a level of fatalities higher than we saw in the 1990s and 2000s. At the same time, negotiated settlements have become more elusive. And according to the Global Peace Index, the number of conflicts that ended through a peace agreement decreased from about 1/4 in the 2000s to just 4% in the last decade. We see many situations of protracted conflict or partial agreements such as ceasefires and truces, which play a role in stopping violence, but are often fragile and contested. Some observers conclude that we have entered a new phase of international relations in which multilateral solutions will be sidelined or question whether the UN can have a helpful role in this environment. But I must say that we've been here before. Throughout history, the UN has grappled with intractable conflict and deep geopolitical divisions. Our ongoing review of peace operations has benefited from a rich and diverse history of UN conflict prevention and resolution. In the Pact for the Future, member states themselves have committed to prioritize the peaceful resolution of disputes and have urged the Secretary General to actively use his good offices and ask the UN to lead and support mediation and preventive diplomacy. This has been reaffirmed in Resolution 2788 last July. So indeed, there is a clear understanding that this work matters, that it is cost effective, and that it must be prioritized. This work is an investment. It saves lives and helps avoid more complex and costly operations down the line. So against this background, I want to speak in response to the question about ways in which preventive diplomacy and mediation can be strengthened. First, we need a risk-tolerant approach. Peacemaking will sometimes fail, even in the majority of cases, but that does not mean we give up. We continue trying because often there is no better alternative. Even when our efforts do not succeed, there is value in the UN and the Secretary General engaging. Secondly, we cannot often know if a priori if the UN will have a role in a process. But we need to explore that actively because history tells us that even when some actors initially think the UN should not be involved, they may gravitate back towards the UN because of its universal membership, impartiality, and operational readiness. Often there is no other actor that can do what we do. Being present and active allows for problem solving and for identifying areas in which the UN can have a useful role. Thirdly, the area of partnerships. Our partnerships, particularly with regional organizations, remain essential. At the same time, regional organizations are also themselves impacted by the same geopolitical challenges that are affecting the UN. They are also facing financial constraints. So we must think of a more dynamic partnership model and avoid a one-size-fits-all approach on regional global partnerships. Each situation must be tackled on its own, looking at how we can each contribute our respective added value. The fourth area is the need to invest in the capacities that we already have. This is important in the UNAID context. Through its history, the Department for Political Affairs and Peacebuilding has acted as a deployable headquarters, with senior officials going to the field to conduct quiet outreach missions, to conduct good offices on behalf of the Secretary General, for fact-finding purposes, and for overall diplomatic work. We have a global mandate because our work may be needed anywhere at any time. We need to continue to invest in this capacity, which is a crucial complement to the role our field missions play in the longer-term deployment in conflict contexts. We also need more consistent and unified support for the work of our peace operations, which are often at the center of our preventive diplomacy and mediation efforts. While nearly all forms of UN peace operations support this work in one form or another, several models of UN peace operations are deployed with an express purpose of peacemaking and facilitation of political processes, example, special envoys, as well as preventive diplomacy, where we have regional offices, such as we have in Dakar, you know us, Libreville, UNOCA, and we also have a regional center for Central Asia. Relatedly, we need to have more solid resource footing. Part of our engagement with the General Assembly last year was to demonstrate that a lot of core functions, that includes good officers, mediation work, were overly reliant on voluntary contributions. This creates political issues as it puts our impartiality into question. We need to think of different models, including how to scale up and down when more active good officers engagements come up. We also need a stronger member state constituencies supporting this type of work and pushing us to do better. We are working together with member states to build a stronger cross-regional constituency for our peacemaking and good officers' work. And finally, leadership remains critical. An envoy of the Secretary General who possesses the unique standing conferred by the UN's universal membership is able to develop trust with the parties and is supported with the right technical expertise, and they can make a difference even in the most intractable context. So finally, let me just emphasize one crucial point. That is, no matter how challenging, geopolitics cannot be an excuse for inaction. It is precisely in tough geopolitical times that the United Nations has to step up its diplomatic work. It was during the height of the Cold War that the UN developed some of its most creative innovations, such as peacekeeping and the concept of the Secretary General's good officers. So we look forward to working with all of you to further strengthen this essential area of our work and to hearing from you on this very important topic this afternoon. I thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you, Ms. Martha, for your insightful remarks and valuable suggestions on the ways how we can better implement Resolution 2788 for strengthening peaceful settlement of disputes. I now invite Dr. Philip Pollier, Assistant Secretary General for Youth Affairs and Head of the UN Youth Office, who leads system-wide efforts to strengthen meaningful youth engagement across peace, development, and human rights. ASG, what institutional and policy reforms are needed to ensure that the United Nations remain effective, credible, and responsible to emerging peace and security challenges, particularly from the perspective of youth inclusion? You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and good afternoon to everyone. I'm very pleased to be with you. I want to thank the Permanent Mission of Pakistan and Global Peace Chain for the invitation to join this discussion. Also, all the member states in the room and civil society partners and UN colleagues. Thank you also, Marta, for your clear reflections from a peace building, peacekeeping perspective, which is very crucial at this point for our UN. And I want to really emphasize the importance also of trying to address a very demanding question you placed. I'm not sure I have the answer for it fully, but at least I want to make some reflections also in relation to the role of our office in this very wide and complex UN ecosystem. Marta was pointing very clearly that the current moment is a very challenging one. And we are kind of in a moment that looks like of global transition. The multilateral system is very clearly under a lot of pressure. But also, this is a huge opportunity, because in a moment where trust is being strained and cooperation is becoming more complex, geopolitical tensions are reshaping many things, it's also an opportunity for transformation. And Marta was reflecting about the role of the UN during the Cold War. But I think in relation to young people, I want to make a reflection, because at this point, we are seeing very clearly that young people are not disengaged. Across countries, young people are reflecting their frustrations with systems that are not really reflecting what are their needs and their aspirations. And we are seeing youth mobilizations across regions, across countries. But these mobilizations shouldn't be seen just as protests. They are really a call for action, for institutions to adapt, to listen, to change, and to respond more effectively to the aspirations of our people in every region. And of course, the UN, as that platform where countries come together, has a very critical role to play when it's about how institutions remain effective, how institutions remain credible, and how institutions remain responsive. And not only for the UN as an organization, especially for the UN as a platform where our governments are coming together. And when we're trying to respond, and when I'm trying to respond to your question, Madam Moderator, I think it's really about focusing in how we practice multilateralism. And what young people everywhere and in every platform that the UN opens for dialogue and for their participation are requesting is for a multilateral system that is more inclusive. And it's also the call for a multilateral system that is more tangible. A multilateral system that is not only felt in these kind of spaces in New York or in Geneva, but a multilateral system that is experienced also in the communities through the action and the operations of our peacekeeping operations, peace building missions, our country teams supporting development efforts of governments across regions. And I think it's very clearly that that is a type of multilateral system that really understands that global change begins locally. And that's where the idea of the UN as an ecosystem for me becomes very critical. Because if we don't recognize also the complexity of the UN, then we are going to fail in how we practice multilateralism and how we make that multilateralism make sense to the day-to-day issues of young people across regions. And the UN is not a single actor. And yes, we're seeing many political, very influential people criticizing the UN as it's like this intellectia, far from everyone. But the truth is that we are all part of the UN. All of our countries, our governments are responsible of how this system can deliver or cannot deliver. It's not a single actor. It's more of this network where we have the member states, we have the different parts of the UN family with responsibilities in operations, but we also have civil society. We have local communities. We have individuals that are part of this system. And that's why when we think about how we make these reforms and how we change, how we practice multilateralism, is really about collective but also individual responsibilities. Collectively, it's about how we ensure that the commitments we make on peace and security, on development, on human rights, are coherently and consistently implemented. Individually, it's about how each of us, in our space, in our square of influence, if I can, are practicing our responsibility. How do my work contribute to this trust building, to this inclusion building, and to this needed impact? And for young people, this really matters. The connection really matters. They are not asking us just to consult them or just to be symbolically practicing participation. They're asking us to be accountable, to include them in governance, to show how we are making these efforts real. And that's why I'm thankful that in the discussion today, we're bringing the lens of the Youth, Peace and Security agenda as a framework, because it's, I would say, one of the most relevant challenges when it's about prevention for the future. And even since we have made progress, since the first moment that the Security Council acknowledged the role of young people as peace builders with the approval of the framework of YPS in 2015, 10 years ago, the truth is that we still have many gaps to put this in practice. And again, how to put this agenda into practice is not about one individual or one institution effort. It's really about this system delivering and putting young people at the center. And just a final reflection in the middle of all these constraints and reforms, that really when it's about delivering better, it's not necessary creating new structures or more structures. It's really about how we use what we already have in place in a better way. And it's how we break our sometimes easy silos and we really look to the one in our side to work together. And allow me to also be enthusiastic and be hopeful, because in a moment where everything looks so negative, it's also very important to look what we have been able to achieve across countries and across the UN. There's many things, good things happening in every region. The UN, it's really contributing to national development efforts, to maintaining peace, and to really maintaining the beacon of hope that things can be different and we can have a system that works for every nation. So on my end, my invitation is that for all of us here is really to think about how we are serving the youth of our communities, of our people. Because the truth is that when we think about how the UN delivers better for youth, it's really about delivering with them and not only for them. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you, ASG, for highlighting that UN's strength lies in being adaptive and inclusive, and especially including the youth. Our next speaker is Ambassador Ahmet Yildiz, a permanent representative of Turkey, who is co-chair of Group of Friends on Mediation. Ambassador, how can the international community revitalize the principles of the UN Charter in the light of mechanisms for peaceful settlement of disputes provided in Chapter 6 to effectively respond to contemporary peace and security challenges? You have the floor.
Thank you, Ms. Moderator. First, I congratulate Pakistani mission and Global Chain for the organization and for the turnout. MashaAllah. Okay. And I thank all participants for their attendance. Of course, the challenges, the collective challenges mentioned by previous speakers against international peace and security require a strong dedication to multilateralism and recommitment to the Charter with renewed urgency. It is very obvious. Because when peaceful settlement fails and when unilateralism prevails, the costs are measured not only in stability, but in human suffering, as we witness in the protracted conflicts. On the 80th anniversary of the UN, we must remember that the Charter is not just a historical document, but a living agreement among nations, a moral and legal compass designed to guide humanity away from the tragedy of wars and toward the promise of peaceful coexistence. From monitoring ceasefires to facilitating mediation and promoting post-conflict support, the role of diplomacy is more vital than ever. The Charter is unequivocal about the obligation to settle disputes peacefully. Therefore, the question is whether we are making full use of these tools it provides. As you mentioned in the question, Charter 6 offers a rich menu of mechanisms, namely negotiation, inquiry, mediation, conciliation, arbitration, and judicial settlement. Yet, too often, these tools are underutilized, under-resourced, or politically sidelined, while crises escalate into armed conflict. Turkey firmly believes that revitalizing the Charter today means restoring confidence in diplomacy and mediation as the first and preferred instrument of maintaining international peace and security, and not a measure of last resort. Instead of allowing these mechanisms to wither, we must work together to strengthen preventive diplomacy and early mediation in order to preempt eruption of violence. Early engagement requires better early warning systems, closer cooperation between the UN, regional organizations, and local actors, and sustain political support for envoys and mediators before positions harden and mistrust becomes entrenched. Preventive diplomacy must be strengthened institutionally and politically. Member states have recently recommitted to these principles, most recently in the Pact for the Future and Security Council Resolution 2788. The pact goes beyond an abstract commitment to peaceable settlement of disputes. Instead, it openly calls to revitalize mechanisms including early warning, crisis management, and pacific settlement of disputes. In other words, the Charter had already given us the tools, and the pact has given us a renewed commitment. Colleagues, as the co-chair of the Group of Friends on Mediation, we have consistently underlined the necessity to institutionalize mediation capacity in the member states, in the organizations, especially in the UN. Mediation is a specialized discipline, a skill that only can be refined by experience. With this in mind, we continue to support the work of the UN Mediation Support Unit and encourage greater investment in training, deployment, and inclusion of diverse mediation teams, including women and youth, whose participation enhances legitimacy and sustainability of peace processes. Our group remains committed to promoting mediation as a standing pillar of peace and security. And we are trying to expand the group as much as we can. Too often, mediation efforts collapse under competing geopolitical interests or lack of sustained international support. For Chapter 6 to be effective, mediation processes must be shielded from politicization. In addition, sustainable peace cannot be imposed. It must be built through trust, inclusion, and mutual respect. Revitalizing Charter also means reaffirming multilateralism at a time when unilateral actions and selective approaches undermine trust in international norms. Peaceable settlement of disputes is not a procedural option. It is a legal and moral obligation under the Charter. When diplomacy is bypassed, we do not only fail conflicting parties, instead we weaken the international system itself. Turkish diplomatic tradition, shaped by geography and history, teaches us that dialogue is not a sign of weakness, but a strategic wisdom. Through facilitation, hosting negotiations, and supporting humanitarian diplomacy, we will continue to invest in peaceful solutions that prioritize human security and regional stability. We have repeatedly demonstrated this in launching the Ankara process between Ethiopia and Somalia, our active role in ceasefire in Gaza, and hosting the first and only direct talks between Russia and Ukraine that facilitated humanitarian exchanges in addition to the Black Sea Grain Initiative. Turkey has played an active role in international peace mediation, leveraging its unique geopolitical position and cultural ties to foster dialogue and resolve conflicts. Located in a region affected by various conflicts, we have taken a pioneering role in raising awareness and building capacity for mediation. Our consistent demonstration of independence and balanced policies has deepened trust in Turkey's capacity to serve as an honest broker and reliable partner in mediation efforts. Revitalizing the principles of the UN Charter through Chapter 6 requires more than reaffirming commitments in our statements. It requires earlier action, stronger institutions, and sustained political courage. The world is witnessing a highest number of armed conflicts since the end of the Second World War. As we face new global challenges, we are constantly reminded that sustainable peace requires leadership, dedication, and creativity. Let us ensure that mediation, negotiation, and peaceful settlement are not overshadowed by the logic of confrontation, but restored to their rightful part of the United Nations. Dear colleagues, at this point, before concluding, usually I get questions about Turkish mediation efforts and its success, usually. As I mentioned in some of my remarks, that mediation is not an abstract thing. It requires a lot of work and a lot of analysis, and sometimes it requires for mediator to know the parties very well, to analyze the atmosphere, to analyze the options, and more importantly, to deploy sometimes national capabilities, even sometimes military capabilities. It's like in the successful Black Sea Ukraine initiative. So we are developing, as Turkish diplomats are developing these skills, and hopefully we can share with others in the future. I'm very grateful to Finnish mission. We are working very productively on this. In conclusion, the summary of my answer to the question by the moderator. During such times of restraint and challenges, we should line up behind the principles of multilateralism, against obstructions, against disruptions, against power politics, instead of cheap bargaining with the disruptors, obstructors. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, for highlighting that Chapter 6 mechanisms are not secondary diplomacy, but the Charter's first and most cost-effective line of defense. I now give the floor to Ambassador Elena Kalku, a permanent representative of Finland, who is co-chair of Group of Friends on Mediation. Madam Ambassador, what practical steps can be taken to restore confidence in multilateral approaches to conflict prevention and resolution? And in this regard, how can member states strengthen hands of the Secretary General to use his good offices under the UN Charter to prevent disputes from escalating into protracted conflicts? You have the floor.
Thank you very much, moderator, and thank you, organizers, and dear colleague, Pakistani colleague, for organizing and convening us today. I thought I would try to answer the two very important and very difficult questions in a brainstorming mode. When it comes to the confidence towards the UN, obviously the confidence is very much a reflection of what the UN does. And confidence obviously follows from what the UN is seen doing in peace mediation or prevention. If the public perception is that the UN is sidelined, this does no good to the confidence, obviously. And others take the stage. Many say here in New York. I don't think that's a bad thing. I would congratulate Turkey for many efforts. I think it's the discussion here should focus more on what the UN can do as the UN and following actually the thoughts of the Charter and in support of others who act. And I think this is all about acting, not about planning too long, not about discussing too much, not about creating documents. Peace mediation prevention is very much about action, I think. And I think it's fair to say that the UN is acting right now. So we deal with an issue with visibility sometimes. It is not always known publicly what the UN actually does already. And I think this is one of the issues that could be addressed, how to give more visibility to what the UN does. We have discussed this also in the Group of Friends on peace mediation, and whether the group could actually engage more with the Secretariat in order to find out and understand what the UN is already doing. When it comes to confidence and the principal organs, and in particular with the Security Council, this is a very tricky question, how to restore confidence, and I would hand that question very much back to the council members also. What can be done if there's no political will to act? I think mostly what the rest of the membership can do is to try to friendly pressurize and encourage the council to act. And I very much appreciate the work of the E10 inside the council, trying to make sure that the council actually acts for peace and prevention. There's of course many quarters at the UN. I think it was Felipe who said that UN is a large entity. The SG, the Secretariat, the GA, and even Peace Building Commission that is gaining importance, I believe. And I think the UN has impressive tools at hand, and I'm not going to list them here. The tools, there are very many good tools. The question is that much about how to use the tools and just have a decision to use the tools. There's one for prevention that my country likes quite a bit. This is the idea that was put in the Pact for the Future, and which is potentially very transformational in prevention, which is the voluntary prevention strategies. This is very much about an issue which is within the sovereignty of countries. I think the basic idea was that countries would analyze their vulnerabilities and their risks, and then identify tools to address them. And there the UN obviously can help. I can tell you that in my country's history, this was very much the approach for my country's development and survival in a very tricky geopolitical location also throughout the history. And the RCs could play a role definitely and bring in the support of the UN to the countries that want to have that advice. I think a GA's role is an important issue to discuss. There is this wonderful handbook on what the GA has actually done. And of course, GA's role is secondary, but at the same time, if we look backwards, what the GA has actually done so far, there's been also decisions taking on measures, dispatching fact-finding missions to monitor or verify situations, launching investigations, nominating envoys, commissions. The GA has even taken a decision on political missions and even lower end type of peacekeeping, although that has been very, very exceptional. The GA can be more active, and the fact is the GA is all of us. It is up to the member states, which is all of us, to make the GA more active. The very tricky question, finally, what member states can do to strengthen the hand of the Secretary General in good offices and prevention. I guess SG position is the most challenging in the world. Each SG has different personal profile, and they share one common challenge, which is how to navigate among the member states, and in particular among the P5. And I understand there's several P5s present here, so I'm saying this as loud as I can. This is the eternal discussion on whether the Secretary General is a secretary or general, actually, and how much leadership can he use. And I think without leadership, there's no peace mediation. It requires leadership, it requires risk-taking, and we all have to understand that some of us, as Martha said, some of those efforts will fail. But if you don't even try, then that's I think an option not to be preferred. Peace mediation is all about taking risks, of course. I think it's also fair to say that when humanitarian law and humanitarian situation collapses, the UN even has an obligation to act. I don't think there's any reason to to say that the UN needs to wait and discuss and not act. I think it's a charter-based obligation to act when civilian populations are targeted, and this is a very important and very topical issue. When we look back in the history and the roles of the SGs, and I will finish with 2 observations. Secretary General U Thant's grandson has written a very good book, which I'm sure many of you have read. It's a very illustrative description of that part of history during the Cold War, when the SG actually tried to act a lot under very, very difficult circumstances. Each Secretary General has different circumstances at hand, but it is educative to see how this worked out long time ago during the Cold War. I think we member states, we need to support the SG. We need to make sure that he has space to act and that he has space to take some risks as well. We have proposed, as Finland, we have proposed an advisory group for the Secretary General to support him in his action, and in the future, him or her, very possibly her. There has been an advisory panel before, but it hasn't acted for years. Now it was it consisted of very eminent persons, not necessarily all in office, incumbent anymore, but I think the idea of supportive group for the SGs is a good one, and that's where the member states can absolutely support him or her. On incentives, this is my final point. The UN has so many tools available. Some of them are even financial. Some of them have to do with development. And I think this is an element that needs to be put more clearly into their discussion, how the UN could provide incentives for peace, and what we all could do to incentivize peace processes. I think that is absolutely a good idea. So there's lots of good ideas. I think there's lots of analysis. There's lots of research on these issues, and I think we just need to make sure it all works out and is put into action. Thank you very much for organizing this discussion.
Thank you, Ambassador, for valuable suggestions. Your remarks clearly show that multilateralism succeeds when member states actively empower it. Our next speaker is Ms. Alice Misqueenie, Permanent Observer of the International Committee of the Red Cross, with extensive legal and humanitarian experience across conflict-affected regions. Ms. Alice, what role can international law, including international humanitarian law, play in preventing conflict and supporting their peaceful resolution and settlement? You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Moderator. And really my thanks and appreciation to Pakistan and to Global Peace Chain for the invitation, the opportunity to contribute to the discussion today. For an organization that spends all of its time in conflict zones, it's obviously a conversation that really hits home. What I would hope to do today is to bring you a little bit of that picture and our experience in both really deep and fundamental ways, but very practical ways, very much along the lines of the previous speakers. I mean, the first thing, of course, to say, looking out across this very full room, as was noted, is how encouraging that is, that when a discussion such as this is framed by the organizers, that this many of you turn up to really lean into the conversation. So we take that as the ICRC to heart. We see the human cost of these issues every single day, and all of your will and action is very much needed on this issue. So very much appreciated. On that note, I would say, I mean, with this room and the fact that you're here, we take for granted that you're very much convinced. And at the same time, I think as we focus on practicalities and tools and modalities, it's also important just to drive home the human reality of the issues that we discuss. So I would start just with the current reality, which is that at least for the ICRC and our role be given to us by states in looking at adherence to international humanitarian law, we today classify 130 conflicts currently in the world today. This number not only has doubled in 15 years, which, I mean, we say it's never been higher since the founding of the United Nations. It's doubled in 15 years. And just to take stock of that and to recognize that that means today, not only who have hundreds of millions of people who experience war as a current reality, but if we also take note that more than 20 of these conflicts have been ongoing for more than 2 decades already. And so if we look at the human reality of that picture, you have generations around the world who have only experienced the reality of war in their lives. And so I think if we needed a reason to lean even further into the conversation and to see what practical tools we have at our disposal and we can use more effectively for this purpose of resolving conflict and sustainable peace, we have every reason to do so. So just then diving in, we would recognize as well, and thank you also to the moderator for framing the question in terms of this relationship between international humanitarian law and international law writ large. I would just recognize that international humanitarian law is part of this broader international legal architecture, and the relationship between these different aspects and parts is very much important. Also, if we recognize the commonality of international humanitarian law being anchored as well in this fundamental belief and grounding in human dignity, inequality of nations, equality of people. And the principles, the very practical rules that derive in these tools and instruments are grounded there. So if we look at, again, very practical ways in which we see through our experience, ICRC over more than 160 years, how adherence to and respect for IHL and the rules of war can really shape conditions for future peace. So if we recognize that these principles and rules, as they've been agreed to by all states, really serve as guardrails to preserve this common humanity in the worst moments. We can look, for example, at really concrete provisions, again, to make it practical in our understanding, provisions against targeting civilians, against targeting medical facilities, on the treatment of prisoners, on the prevention of forced disappearances. What our work shows in practice is that adherence and respect to these rules actually helps preserve social, institutional, economic fabric that is most needed, not just in emerging out of conflict, but in really forging the social fabric that's required for the sustainable peace afterward. What we see is that adherence to IHL and dialogue between states on these issues keeps pathways open. And where these limits collapse, we see that the peaceful solutions and the opportunities for this really narrow. What I would add there, and really just to bring this into the most practical exchange possible, as we say, mediation itself is not an abstract exercise, and this adherence to international law and this relationship is also very practical. Our experience shows that humanitarian issues and the exchange on humanitarian issues very often serve as entry points for dialogue when political negotiations are blocked. Commitments grounded in IHL, such as addressing the fate of missing people, displacement, weapons contamination issues, guarding essential services, for example, have in practice often served as issues that parties themselves have been willing to discuss, for example, through good offices and mediation efforts, and that the practice of engaging in those conversations on very practical human concerned issues can sometimes establish trust, confidence building that then can open doors toward further political discussions. Addressing these issues, of course, they relieve human suffering in the very immediate term, but we see in practice that because they're anchored in human dignity, they remain foundational for sustainable peace. agreements on, for example, civilian protection, prisoners of war releases in particular, and on the missing service, these confidence building measures, in particular when political trust is the most low. They reinforce restraint, reduce grievances, and can provide momentum toward broader political negotiations. What I want to bring also forward as a contribution, and I would look forward to exchanging further on that, is some of you may be aware, and many of you are in the room who have taken part, is this link and relationship between respect for international humanitarian law in particular, international law writ large, and peace efforts and sustainable peace is really sitting at the heart of this global initiative that the ICRC is very proud to have been able to launch with 6 states just a bit over a year ago. And bringing it home to this discussion, there's one dedicated work stream of this initiative specifically on this relationship between IHL and peace. That work stream is co-chaired by Bangladesh, Colombia, Ethiopia, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. They've held 2 rounds of state consultations already. A 3rd consultation will be held in the first week of February. And what we can see is that through this examination and exchange among states on this issue, they're yielding a lot of very practical, actionable findings, recommendations, and especially on this relationship between mediation efforts and respect for IHL. So if we look, for example, at some of the issues that they've been exploring through these rounds of consultation, and will continue to do in the 3rd one, is looking at the parallels between the inclusivity of a peace process and the actors who are engaged in it, with the grounding of IHL rules in all cultural norms and practices historically and around the world. And again, this broad-based notion is foundational to the sustainability of the efforts. They also look, for example, at how respect for IHL is not just something that happens during wartime, but it's something that you prepare for. It's also something that you follow up on coming out of a peace effort and to sustain the peace after. So looking at various past experiences, for example, clauses that have been contained in peace settlement agreements and how these references to IHL have helped sustain the peace beyond. So I would just bring that forward, make a plug also for the initiative, and thanks to all of those. There are not only members of the founding group of states present in the room, but as well members who have co-chaired other work streams, Pakistan included. Thank you. And to all of you who have been participating in those consultations over the last year plus, and we look forward to more coming out. Thank you very much.
Your intervention is a powerful reminder that respect for international law is not abstract. It directly determines human dignity and protection on the ground. I now invite our last speaker, Mr. Jonah Harris, a policy analyst at the International Peace Institute, whose work focuses on peace, climate and development nexus and partnership across multilateralism and civil society actors. Mr. Jonah, how can partnerships between member states, regional organizations, and civil society be leveraged to promote inclusive and sustainable conflict prevention and resolution? You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. And thank you as well to the Pakistani mission, to Global Peace Chain, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. And I'll note at the outset that I am speaking in my personal capacity. I appreciate the conversations that we've had today, and I've already learned quite a bit. This is certainly timely, given the record number of armed conflicts, the stark challenges in the multilateral system, and the increasing stressors impacting the root causes of conflict, including what I work on primarily, which is climate change. There is absolutely an urgent need to build better bridges between regional organizations and civil society organizations with member states and with UN bodies, including, I think, most importantly, the Security Council. The simple fact is that such partnerships are necessary and inevitable because expertise, resources, knowledge about particular areas, and even personal stakes are not siloed within member states, within governments, within the UN. They exist broadly, so cooperation and work among a wide array of actors is inevitable and necessary. Responses to creating peace and sustaining peace can take many different forms, but however you define the form, however it looks like, civil society organizations and regional organizations have critical roles to play. I think in any situation, we benefit when there is open speech, when we have more voices, when there's a free exchange of ideas leading to creative solutions, when we can draw upon expertise, academic and otherwise, and use evidence and science-based approaches to reach our goals. And overall, the flexibility and resilience in a system from having many different actors working together is a benefit to all. Now, speaking to the how civil society and regional organizations can work with member states and the UN, there really isn't a one-size-fits-all way to do that. There's too many differences between regional organizations, their priorities, their mandates, their norms, and that's the comparatively small group of regional organizations. Civil society organizations are many more. They're much more diverse in what they do. So one size fits all is not possible. But speaking broadly, regional organizations are well placed to lead and to coordinate with the UN and with states on peace operations. Very often that's economically efficient with the comparative advantage of the local organization. They'll be sensitive to the local histories and the political realities. And of course, they have a greater stake in having a peaceful region. And I guess I would add as a last benefit of using regional organizations in this context is that it builds their capacities, which creates follow-on benefits. Turning to civil society organizations, broadly speaking, they're very good at the root causes of conflict and the stressors, at promoting the inclusivity that studies repeatedly show is fundamental to sustainable peace. They are home to experts who have drawn on their expertise and their research to find what works in particular contexts. They're good at working behind the scenes and in collaboration. And finally, they are good at bridging people, organizations, working with other organizations, governments, other non-state actors. So I think that's good news. There's space for flexibility, space for creativity, public, private, formal, informal, big, small, it all can work. Fundamentally, I think the collaboration and the space and resources that each actor can draw upon its own strengths is what is the common thread in successful collaboration. To give some examples, cooperation can oftentimes be as simple as giving space, as stepping back. I think it's, as many of us know, sometimes doing nothing or stepping back is harder, but more effective than stepping forward and trying to butt in. A good example of this is the Land for All initiative that tries to bring together civil society members of Israelis and Palestinians to work towards a solution to that conflict. As we know, the political lines are so challenging at the government level that just giving them the space to talk, to be creative, to exchange ideas is extremely beneficial. Another key way to support regional organizations and civil society organizations is through funding. The UN Security Council, I think in 2023, passed Resolution 2719, which would increase the ability of the UN to fund African Union-led peace operations. And this is a very good example of something that will help not only in affecting peace on the ground, but strengthening the region and strengthening both organizations. And finally, it's economically efficient. As a final example of what civil society organizations can do by bridging different actors and working behind the scenes, we've seen the Meet the Parties platform from Independent Diplomat that has brought together UN member states with non-state actors and civil society organizations, and the responses to that have been extremely positive. As a final note, I think that civil society organizations, and to a slightly lesser extent regional organizations, have their own unique strengths. They should be respected and they should be cooperated with from member states. And on the flip side, organizations should understand that states have the democratic legitimacy, the mandates from their people. And so they should not speak over them, not assume that their expertise is more important than the political positions. So to finish, I think it's extremely important at this time to support the multilateral system. I think the good news is that there's a lot of ways to do that. And as we've heard from my fellow panelists, we are not completely in the dark about what works. There are many tools that we know are effective. They just need to be implemented. So when we leave here today, time to get to work. Thank you.
Thank you for your remarks. I'm grateful to all the panelists for their valuable suggestions and insights and enriching this important discussion. Now, I would request the chair of this high-level discussion, Ambassador Asim Iftikhar Ahmed, Permanent Representative of Pakistan to the United Nations, to invite member states for their views and comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saima. I would like to come in at this stage to co-moderate this session. We've had a pretty rich discussion, very thought-provoking ideas presented by the distinguished panelists. And I know there is great interest in the room. I see a number of ambassadors, colleagues who are here. So would like to open the floor for this segment where we will like to listen to the views from member states. And then we will follow it up with a short question answer session from other participants. So I would like to open and give the floor to the permanent representative of Austria, to be followed by the PR of Azerbaijan.
Thank you. Thank you, dear Asim, and thank you also to the co-chairs of the group of friends and the Global Peace Chain. I'll cut my statement in interest of time, but congratulations to filling a windowless conference room on a Friday afternoon. This is, real commitment. Conflict prevention and mediation, of course, is based on the Charter. I'll just paraphrase and be fast, but of course, the Charter remains our fundamental document, our bedrock of the international rules-based order, and our shared commitment to the peaceful settlement of disputes. This is no longer a given; it has to be re-emphasized. Three short points. One, the rule of law at an international level. Simply put, this respect for international law rather than the law of the stronger remains our best bet for ensuring an international environment that delivers security, stability, and prosperity for all of us. I think some might have the luxury to rely on themselves, but most of us don't. So I think this is really, really fundamental, needs to be said. As the chair of the group of friends of the rule of law, we're committed to promoting the respect for international law, accountability, and strong legal institutions. And we will follow up with several events this year. Secondly, Austria strongly supports recentering the UN in peacemaking and preventive efforts. We had and this is, of course, directed towards the good offices that was also mentioned by Elena and others of the Secretary General. While I believe we should not put all the blame or all the burden on the Secretary General, but share that responsibility, we had a very good. We co-hosted an event with the International Peace Institute on leadership for peace, because we believe that there is space for the Secretary General, maybe not as much space as in some of the past constellations, but there is space. But it takes not only political courage from the Secretary General, it also takes political support from us and political will to support him or her in such efforts. And last point I want to make is we need a truly networked United Nations. While I'm personally extremely intrigued by Track 2 and 1.5 and other initiatives, and I'm strongly committed also to what ICRC does, opening the doors for broader dimensions. That would be my question. How do you protect this humanitarian track from the battle of narratives? So just to also get a question from me. But I think we need this in this networked multilateralism. we need and we can use the expertise of organizations like the African Union or ECOWAS or OSCE and many others, because they have the best knowledge how to enter such a dialogue. But of course, I'm also a big believer in Artisari institutes and other great initiatives like what Turkey did in the context of the horrible conflict in Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Gregor. The Ambassador of Azerbaijan, we followed by the Ambassador of China.
Yeah, it works now. Thank you, Asim. I would like to begin by commending the permanent mission of Pakistan and the global peace chain for convening this high-level discussion and share briefly some thoughts as to the possible ways of ensuring effective response to peace and security challenges and strengthening preventive diplomacy and mediation. As is known, the overarching purpose of the UN was defined as maintaining international peace and security. And to that effect, collective measures were envisaged for the prevention and removal of threats to the peace and suppression of acts of aggression and bringing about adjustment or settlement of international disputes by peaceful means. However, over the past 8 decades, some successes have been accompanied by major setbacks. It is noteworthy that in most cases, if not all, the violators of international law seek to substantiate their claims and actions by misinterpreting their commonly agreed norms and principles and misusing the means of dispute or conflict settlement as a shield for consolidating military gains, prolonging impunity, and delaying peace. In that sense, stronger cooperation and more efforts are needed to counter misinterpretations and disinformation. States have a free choice as to the mechanisms of settling their disputes or resolving conflicts to reach satisfactory terms for their termination by themselves. However, it should be clarified that the sole purpose of the principle of the peaceful settlement of disputes is to prevent disputes from escalating, rather than to freeze the outcomes of armed hostilities. Otherwise, the prohibition on the use of force and the right of self-defense would have little value. Azerbaijan's own painful experience is a striking example of apparent deviation of the then existing regional conflict settlement format from the universally accepted principles of effective mediation. First and foremost, for the credibility and effectiveness of preventive diplomacy and mediation, selectivity and double standards should have no place in issues relating to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states. Furthermore, mediation should not and cannot monopolize all dispute or conflict-related issues and prevent the UN and other international organizations from fulfilling their respective mandates. As one of the non-binding means of settling international disputes, whether offered by the United Nations or regional or sub-regional organizations, mediation is a voluntary process, excluding imposition and requiring consent of the parties in contention. Last but not least, for the purposes of promoting and sustaining peace, greater solidarity is essential with countries that are overcoming the severe consequences of conflict, rebuilding devastated cities, rehabilitating the destroyed environment and biodiversity, and helping forcibly displaced populations return to their homes in safety and dignity. Such solidarity is critical to my country and many states around the world. Azerbaijan reaffirms its resolve to continue consistent efforts towards further consolidating peace, security, and stability in our region and beyond, and promoting and expanding international and regional partnership and cooperation to that effect. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Tawfiq. I would like to give the floor to Ambassador of China, followed by the Ambassador of Cambodia and Egypt.
Very timely discussion. Also thank all the panelists for their valuable insights. And also I would like to thank the moderator for very excellent moderating. As other colleagues have already noted, our world is entering into a new period of turbulence and transformation. The international security landscape is becoming increasingly complex, and we have witnessed growing violations of the principles enshrined in the UN Charter. So in this context, I believe that today's meeting offers a pivotal platform for us to revisit our shared aspirations at the founding of the United Nations and to forge ahead together in the common interest of international peace and security. So taking this opportunity, I would like to share the following points. First, as Ambassador Asim has already mentioned, we must hold to the purpose and the principles of the UN Charter. The Charter establishes the basic norms governing international relations and provides the foundation for international peace and stability. One thing must be made clear. The challenges we face today do not arise because the Charter is outdated, but because its principles have not been fully honored. Those principles, such as sovereign equality, non-interference in internal affairs, and peaceful settlement of disputes, remain essential for today's world. They constitute the cornerstones of international order and must be applied consistently, not selectively. Second, we must remain firmly committed to dialogue and consultation. Security Council Resolution 2788, unanimously adopted during Pakistan's presidency in July 2025, reaffirmed our collective will and determination to pursue peaceful settlement of disputes. Durable peace is not forged through powerful projection or unilateral pressure, but through dialogue and diplomacy. Countries should respect each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity, take seriously each other's legitimate security concerns, and strengthen mutual strategic trust. The international community must invest more in mediation, good offices, and preventive diplomacy, and create conducive environment for dialogue and cooperation. Third, we must further enable the UN to fulfill its responsibilities. Over the past 80 years, the UN has played a vital role in promoting the peaceful resolution of disputes. In the face of rising tensions and conflicts, the Security Council, as the organ entrusted with the primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, must act with unity, objectivity, and a strong sense of common responsibility. And it must ensure the effective implementation of the resolutions it has adopted. Member states should support the UN Secretary General in exercising an enhanced role in conflict resolution, in close coordination and complementarity with the Security Council. Fourth and lastly, we must support the constructive role of the Global South. Amid profound changes around the world, the Global South represents a stabilizing, constructive, and a progressive force. We should support Global South groupings such as BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in fully leveraging their collective wisdom so as to make greater contributions to the maintenance of international peace and security. As Martha just mentioned, the United Nations should also work closely with the regional organizations such as the African Union, ASEAN, and the League of the Arab States, and support them in playing a leading role in resolving conflicts and tensions in their respective regions. Mr. Chair, China will continue to work with the international community to uphold the UN Charter, support the peaceful settlement of disputes, and make great contributions to international peace and development. I thank you.
Thank you so much for those remarks. I would just like to note, otherwise we are on time, but I see the number of requests for floor are increasing. So if I would beg your indulgence, if we can have slightly shortened remarks, 2-3 minutes, so that we give opportunity to everyone. And I would also like to have a window at the end for question answers. So I would like pass on to the ambassador of Cambodia, followed by Egypt.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Hasim. First, I commend Pakistan for organizing these timely high-level discussions as we mark the 80th anniversary of the United Nations Charters, the solid foundation for multilateralism and rule-based international law. I also would like to thank the panelists for their meaningful briefing earlier. Cambodia strongly believes that preventive diplomacy and mediations as effective and cost-efficient tools for conflict prevention and resolution. Early engagement, confidence building measures, and impartial good offices remain essential in the preventing disputes from escalating into the armed conflicts. As a peace-loving small state, it comes to conflict prevention and resolution, Cambodia has consistently adhered to the principles of peaceful settlements and regional arrangements as enshrined in the Chapter 6 and Chapter 8 of the UN Charters, respectively. Cambodia's journey from decades of war to lasting peace achieved through the win-win policy of our former Prime Minister Samdech Techo teach us a fundamental truth that war cannot end war. The threat of use of force have no room in Cambodia's policy nor in our conduct of international relations. However, Cambodia observed, as do others, that violations of states' sovereignties, encroachment on and occupation of territorial integrities, and selective application of international law remained unabated. Therefore, when international law is abused and compromised, the UN Charter is undermined. The credibility of our shared institutions, the one we love the most, would be eroded. In conclusion, whatever the challenges we are facing, Cambodia remained committed to international law, upholding the UN charters in both word and practice, and stand ready to work with partners and stakeholders to advance international peace and security for our world's communities. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Shreya. Ambassador of Egypt, followed by Ambassador of Timor-Leste.
Thank you very much, Asim, and thank you and your mission and for the Global Peace Chain Initiative for hosting this meeting, which is very timely. The title of this event, Reimagining Conflict Prevention and Resolution, couldn't be more relevant for the developments that this UN is facing nowadays. And it's very important that we go back to basics and to refocus on conflict prevention and conflict resolution rather than conflict management, which I think the way and the method with which the UN for long has approached its role in conflict mediation and conflict prevention. As the others said, and the ambassador of China, the charter remains fully relevant, especially the provisions on the peaceful settlement of disputes, and that the real challenge is not in its adequacy, but in our collective commitment to implement it faithfully and consistently. I also would like to emphasize here what others mentioned in terms of the availability of the tools for the United Nations and for the international community to deploy in conflict prevention and in conflict resolutions. And particularly the national voluntary prevention strategies as a tool, as the ambassador of Finland mentioned. I think this is a very underutilized concept, and it's an underutilized investment in prevention, because no prevention and no sustainability of peace can be assured without a national or a nationally led leadership and a national vision for sustainable peace. And that takes me to the one of the tools that the United Nations has, and is also still very much underutilized, is the peace building architecture. Egypt recently concluded together with Slovenia, they co-chaired the 20th anniversary, or the fifth review of the peace building architecture. And Asim, you were here in 2005 when the earlier resolution was adopted. And the problems then was that this was found as a solution for the repeated relapse into conflict. So there was an investment through peacekeeping and through political processes and mediation into conflict. And then there was this famous statistics that conflict relapse within 5 to 7 years of its end. And that's why the question here is about the continuity, the continuum, the link between security and development, and the longer term perspective and investment in prevention. And here again, it's about development and about the root causes of the conflict. This also comes very, very timely, because what we are witnessing some trend into what I would like to call superficial mediation and conflict resolution. Happy to put a paper together with a few articles and get leaders to sign on it and have a good photo and a very nice social media tweet, for example. That is something that we should really resist as the new trend for conflict resolution. So I think we should really go back to the tools that we have, and we have many, but we need to keep an eye on sustainability and on the longer term vision and on the national dimension of leading the efforts with the support of the international community and the United Nations, of course. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ihab, and for taking us back to 2005. And I think it's also important, as we are discussing, to go back to 1945, the charter and and all that that is there and yet to be implemented. I'd like to give the floor to the ambassador of Timor-Leste, followed by Cuba.
passing. All protocols observed. Um, uh, we think at the time of intensifying geopolitical rivalries, and rapid technological challenge, and increasing interconnected global risks, I think today's dialogue is both timely and necessary. So it invites us to strengthen the tools of Chapter 6 of the Charter to reinforce multilateralism, uphold the rules-based international order, and move decisively from reaction to prevention. Timor-Leste's own journey from violence to peace underscores the enduring relevance of these mechanisms. Excellency, in this context, the for the Future, adopted at the 2024 Summit of the Future, represents an important step forward. Its emphasis on inclusive dialogue, prevention, and the integration of peace with sustainable development resonates strongly with Timor-Leste's reconciliation experience. This momentum is reinforced by Security Council Resolution 2788, which revitalizes Chapter 6 through enhanced preventive diplomacy and stronger coordination across the UN system. We believe that these initiatives could provide a solid foundation for further progress. And Timor-Leste, looking ahead, Timor-Leste proposes several target enhancements to Chapter 6. The first is to strengthen the early warning system, including responsive use of AI-supported predictive tools to anticipate and de-escalate crises before violence erupts. Second, develop frameworks to protect digital sovereignty and counter disinformation, particularly for small states facing asymmetric vulnerabilities. Some friends have referred to it before. And third, expand preventive diplomacy to address non-traditional security risks, such as pandemics, supply chain disruptions, and climate-induced resource scarcity, which are now major drivers of instability. We believe that effective prevention is important and requires investment and inclusion. We support enhanced mediator training, innovation in digital and remote mediation tools, and meaningful participation by youth and also women in the process, in the peace process. Our experience on a community-based reconciliation experience shows that peace is more sustainable when it is inclusive, locally grounded, and supported by credible institutions. So prevention must be people-centered, not only state-centered. In conclusion, Mr. Chair, this commemoration of the UN Charter 80th anniversary reaffirms our enduring relevance and moral authority. By prioritizing prevention, embracing innovation, strengthening inclusion, and renewing multilateral cooperation, I think we all can honor the Charter's vision while adapting to today's challenges. We remain committed to the principles, and we work together to advance a stable international order. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Dionisio. The Ambassador of Cuba, to be followed by the Ambassador of Slovenia.
Thank you, Ambassador. We thank Pakistan for convening this high-level debate on the occasion of the 80th anniversary of the UN Charter, which is very timely. The world is facing a convergence of crises, conflicts, and threats to international peace and security. In this context, respect for the UN Charter and the principles of sovereignty, equality, non-interference, territorial integrity of states, and the peaceful settlement of disputes are more necessary than ever. A renewed commitment is needed to prevent and resolve conflicts through dialogue, mediation, and conciliation. We believe that international cooperation and solidarity should prevail in international relations instead of aggressions or threats if we want to face current challenges in the best possible way. We need less military spending and more investment in sustainable development, as well as to eradicate the root causes of conflicts, such as exclusion and poverty. We demand a renewed commitment to peace and multilateralism. We reject hostile rhetoric and aggressions against sovereign states that directly threatens peace and stability we all need. Despite the current challenges, we consider the UN is the forum where we can all address this issue on equal footing, and it has demonstrated over its 80 years that its diverse tools and efforts in good office and mediation are of great importance. Cuba is a Pacific country with long-standing position in favor of peace and multilateralism, and we remain committed to the UN Charter and the proclamation of Latin American and the Caribbean as a zone of peace. In this regard, we have to say that Cuba is proud to be one of the guarantor countries for the peace processes in Colombia. As a guarantor country, we provide broad ongoing support to the parties, making practical and political contributions. One key task is to safeguard the negotiating process and provide assistance to ensure compliance with the rules agreed by both parties. It has been a great experience for us and also a contribution to UN efforts in this sister nation, and we reaffirm our willingness to continue working in that regard with Colombia, Norway, and also to the United Nations as much as needed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would like to give the floor now to the Ambassador of Slovenia, followed by Qatar.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and thank you for the invitation. I'll be very quick because I'd like to leave the space for others to talk as well. But following the Ambassador of Egypt who mentioned the PBAR, I have to say that, yes, the process and the adoption of the PBAR this fall was an achievement, and it reaffirmed, in our view, the collective commitment to strengthening the UN capacity to prevent the conflict and sustain peace. I am afraid, however, that only a couple of weeks later, we're seeing quite a challenge to global security landscape. I will also touch upon something that has been said, that has been mentioned a lot this afternoon, and that is the respect for the Charter and the principles of the Charter. I have to completely agree. We don't need to rewrite the Charter. Charter is actually one of the best legal documents that we have, and it has withstand the test of time. This is exactly why the principles are called principles. However, they need to be respected, like the international law needs to be respected, it needs to be upheld, and it needs to be complied with. This is how we see it. On the conflict prevention, conflict prevention in our view is the cornerstone of the international peace and security, and it is worth every investment. Every investment into preventing the conflict is worth it. It is not easy. It demands time, it demands courage, and most of all, it depends a lot of it requires a lot of political will. How we see it, the best prevention should be nationally owned, and when possible, also localized. So the role of regional and sub-regional organizations, in our view, is really vital. The same goes for the systematic engagement with civil society, women's and youth-led organizations as well. Then it must be inclusive also for the reason that it needs to address the root causes. Otherwise, it will not be, or the process itself or the aftermath. Otherwise, we don't see how this could be a sustainable, but also permanent to prevent the recurrence. So the UN is uniquely equipped for the prevention, and the cooperation between the UN and the regional and sub-regional organizations that I've mentioned is really key, because it can yield significant results, including through the exchange of best practices. So the UN should be seen and felt on the ground. For that, it must be backed by solid financial and human resources, in particular the DPPA in this case. So both the UN and the member states must invest in collective knowledge and expertise. And also, the preventive diplomacy and the peace building, there has been a lot of talk about this today, should be seen as integral part of the Security Council's mandate. So to that end, the Council should fully employ the toolbox that it has, including its relations with the PBC, and take advantage of that. For example, make more effective use of the advisory role of the PBC. So I just want to end with once again reaffirming our unwavering support and belief into multilateralism, and we believe that we are living in a moment that calls for deeper and more proactive engagement from all of us. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you so much. I would like to give followed by Indonesia.
Thank you, Ambassador. We thank the security and stability worldwide. It's indeed an opportune time to reaffirm that the UN Charter continues to serve as the legal and moral compass for advancing collective security, rooted in the lessons of the immense suffering caused by the war. The Charter emphasizes principles, particularly under Chapter 6, that provides a timeless framework for resolving disputes through negotiation, mediation, conciliation, arbitration, judicial settlement, and other peaceful means. The state of Qatar has long subscribed to these principles and has accordingly pursued a foreign policy that assigns the highest priority to the peaceful settlements of disputes, including through mediation. Guided by international law and the UN Charter, we of course continue to invest in diplomacy and good offices in support of political solution to crises. We believe today's conflicts are evolving in form of complexity, yet amid emerging challenges, the principles of the Charter remains as relevant as ever. That's underscored by Security Council Resolution 2788, which highlights the importance of preventive diplomacy and mediation. It is also repeatedly underscored in international forums, notably the 2024 Pact for the Future revitalizes collective commitment to conflict prevention through inclusive dialogue and trust building. To meet persistent and evolving challenges, we must complement traditional diplomacy with innovative approaches, including digital diplomacy and the responsible use of artificial intelligence. In this regard, we support the efforts of the DPPA in advancing mediation and exploring innovative tools that can strengthen preventive action. We underscore also the importance of strengthening international norms and cooperation to address evolving threats to global stability, including terrorism, cyber threats, and disinformation. The state of Qatar's approach further recognizes that sustainable peace requires inclusive processes that meaningfully engage all stakeholders, including women and youth, consistent with the inclusive vision of Pact of the Future. And in this spirit, we continue to support the Women, Peace and Security Agenda and has co-sponsored the Global Conference on Youth Inclusive Peace Processes to amplify youth contributions to peacemaking. In closing, allow me to reiterate our unwavering commitment to multilateralism and to the principles of the UN Charter and international law. Thank you, Ambassador.
Asia, followed by Venezuela and Russia.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, Indonesia thank the Permanent Mission of Pakistan and the other co-organizers for convening this timely discussion. We wish to reiterate many important points that delivered by distinguished speakers. As the world faces increasingly complex and transnational challenges, the pressure on the UN to deliver early, credible, and principled action will only intensify. Against this backdrop, it is important to recall that conflict prevention is not an optional add-on. It is embedded in the Charter itself, as many of our speakers highlighted, the Chapter 6 of the Charter. And for Indonesia, support conflict prevention is a direct expression of our commitment to UN Charter and multilateralism. With this spirit, we commend Pakistan for its vigorous role as a non-permanent member of the Security Council, including its leadership in the adoption of the Resolution 2788 on peaceful settlement of dispute and conflict prevention, we wish to underline 3 points. The first one is, again, we must revitalize the Charter's toolbox for the Pacific settlement of disputes, as we discussed this afternoon, that this contain of, among others, peaceful settlement, including negotiation, mediation, conciliation, that should be used more often and consistently. Preventive diplomacy and mediation should be strengthened as credible and cost-effective instruments, including through the Secretary General's good offices and closer cooperation with regional organizations. Second, supporting national-led and owned prevention strategies. Member states bear the primary responsibility to prevent conflict and to address its root causes and structural drivers. Therefore, it is important to ensure conflict prevention strategies tailored within the context-specific challenges. At the same time, this would require international support aligned with nationally identified priorities and advances coherent approaches. Third, prevention must adapt to evolving risks and opportunities, better use of digital technology, and to enable better data-driven policy analysis. Across these efforts, inclusion remains essential. Women, youth, and civil society must be enabled to participate safely and meaningfully in shaping peace and security. Consistent with the Pact for the Future and its inclusive vision, and in line with UNSC Resolution 2788, emphasize on inclusive approaches to peaceful settlement. Distinguished delegates, Indonesia reaffirms its commitment to cooperate with all partners so that our shared undertakings yield practical early action, strengthen collaboration, and peaceful solutions, in line with the Charter and the evolving challenges before us. I thank you.
Thank you very much. We have Venezuela to be followed by the Russian Federation.
For the convening of this meeting and all panelists for their useful insights. I will deliver the statement in the name of our Deputy Permanent Representative, who was looking forward to attend this meeting, but due to unexpected business, will be unable to be here. Distinguished moderators, excellencies, as we commemorate our 80th anniversary of the Charter of the United Nations, we must reflect on its relevance and on states' degree of commitment to the principles that gave rise to this organization. The UN Charter's purpose was clear: to prevent force replacing law, to end the law of the strongest, to banish the logic of the law of the jungle from international relations. Its essence lies in establishing that disputes between states must be resolved peacefully within a common, predictable, and universal legal framework. Violating the Charter is a direct attack against the entire multilateral system, including the collective security system that we have built over the past 8 decades. When the use of force is tolerated, the institutional framework that underpins international peace, security, and stability is weakened. The consequences affect us all equally, whether directly or indirectly. The armed aggression perpetrated by the United States of America against Venezuela on January 3rd, 2026, is a flagrant violation of the Charter of the United Nations. During the early hours of that day, US military forces shelled civilian and military areas in Caracas and other parts of Venezuelan territory, attacked critical infrastructure, including medical supply depots and research centers, killing more than 100 people, and kidnapped the constitutional president of the Republic and the First Lady, in open violation of international law and the immunities inherent to a sitting head of state and government. Distinguished moderators, this aggression came after public threats, a gradual buildup of military forces just a few miles from our shores, disinformation campaigns, and a total disregard for the peaceful dispute resolution mechanisms set out in the UN Charter itself. Prevention cannot be selective because when unfairly applied, it becomes complicity. In this regard, inaction or ambiguity regarding the use of force, whether by the Security Council or the Secretary General of the United Nations, must be clearly identified, as it's tantamount in practice to normalizing its use in open contradiction with Chapter 6 of the Charter. The commitments made under the Pact of the Future and the spirit of Security Council Resolution 2788-2025 are meaningless if they are applied with doubled standards. The law must apply equally to all, including the most powerful states. It is deeply troubling that an armed aggression of this magnitude, with a trail of death, destruction, and the kidnapping of a head of state and government, has not yet been clearly commented by the main bodies and actors of the multilateral system. Distinguished moderators, reimagining prevention and conflict resolution requires consistency, impartiality, and real political will, not selectivity or convenient silences. 80 years after the adoption of the UN Charter, the question is whether it is still relevant or not, whether we're truly willing to comply with it strictly without accommodating interpretations. Peace cannot be built on the basis of impunity, nor multilateralism on the basis of force. I thank you.
Hi, thank you so much. And now I give the floor to the Russian Federation.
I would like to thank the Permanent Mission of Pakistan for convening us today and also the panelists for their informative remarks. We consider today's discussion as a follow-up to the UN Security Council high-level open debate on promoting international peace and security through multilateralism and the peaceful settlement of disputes, which was held in July under the Pakistan's presidency, as well as an opportunity to assess progress in implementation of the Security Council resolution 2788, also presented by Pakistan. In this context, I would like to make the following observations. First, conflict prevention, mediation, and good offices are in high priority for many states, as well as for the UN Secretariat. At the same time, it is quite common for countries in conflict to be reluctant to resort to the UN services, fearing that they will ultimately be used to interfere in their internal affairs. The reasons for this cautious approach are clear, and some countries exploit the UN's flag to exert pressure on sovereign states. We are convinced that without trust, the Secretariat's preventive diplomacy efforts would be impossible. Genuine impartiality of the Secretariat and field missions is in strict accordance with Articles 100 and 101 of the UN Charter remain imperative. Second, we note the diversity of means provided by the UN Charter for peaceful settlement of disputes, from negotiations and mediation to international litigation. However, effectiveness of these instruments depends on the good faith of the parties to dispute to achieve solutions without external interference. At the same time, we should not be misled into thinking that reaching peace agreements is the final stage of conflict resolution. Strict implementation of these agreements is essential. Otherwise, all efforts will be in vain. If all states, without exception, adhere to the spirit and letter of the UN Charter, fully and not selectively implement its provisions, the United Nations will be able to overcome existing differences and geopolitical divisions and reach common ground on most issues. In conclusion, I would like to specifically address the issue of early warning mentioned in the concept note to the discussion. While looking good on paper, in practice, this idea is often used as a tool for politically motivated interference in internal affairs. It's worth remembering that numerous attempts to identify universal indicators of conflict have failed, and each situation requires individual consideration and tailored approach. I thank you.
I thank you for those remarks. I'd like to pass the floor back to moderator Ms. Saima, perhaps to take one or two questions from other participants before we conclude.
Thank you, Ambassador. We can take a couple of questions from youth delegates from Global Peace Chain. Kindly raise your hand, be brief, and introduce yourself. Yes.
All right. Standing on existing protocol. My name is Akim Nafiu. I'm from Nigeria. Um, and I'm also a conflict resolution instructor, and I'm an educational researcher. And this discussion is deeply important to me because my work focuses on how societies learn to manage disagreements, rebuild trust, and prevent conflicts before it escalates. Listening to the panels and member states today, a consistent message has emerged. We have the tools under the chapter 6. So my question is this: how can the United Nations more deliberately integrate conflict resolution into education by bringing youth leadership into practice and talking about the mediation capacity in the dialogue of a future nation? Thank you.
Yes. Press the microphone.
Oh, sorry. Good afternoon. My name is Nicole Ma from Los Angeles, United States. And my question is, what are some recent examples of successful interventions by the United Nations and/or multilateral organizations, countries to de-escalate conflict? Thank you.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Clavence Work. I'm from Haiti. First of all, I want to thank the Global Peace Change for this event and the current global context. This kind of situation or this kind of event are extremely important. I believe that the peace we're trying to build, we're trying to bring in the world must first start in every single country. And as a young Haitian who has been directly affected by the gangs violence, who has been forced to leave his country, I often feel lost in those kind of situation or those kind of conversation because I'm asking myself like why nobody says nothing in the current Haiti situation, why everybody does like everything is okay. So my question is, we need to understand that Haiti is facing a urgent emergency and the world must be care. We need to pay attention because not only for the history of Haiti, the first black country independent, but for his strategic geopolitical position. So we need to understand when Haiti cries, the world feels the feeling, and the peace we're gonna build in the world must start in Haiti as the freedom start over there. So the question is, as a young educated Haitian, how can I how Haiti can be useful in this process? What role Haiti can play in this situation? Thank you.
For their brief concluding remarks and responding to any of the question that has been posed. All of you, because of the shortage of time, has 1 minute. First, ASG Martha.
Thank you very much. And just briefly to thank all the delegations that have taken the floor. Very useful contributions, and I've taken very good note of them. I'll try to answer. There's a question around any successes in terms of our intervention roles, prevention roles. Absolutely. The nature of the work we do in diplomacy, sometimes it doesn't lend itself to publicity. And there's a lot of quiet diplomacy that often our field, at the level of the field, we have to do, or when we have to visit from headquarters. So there is a lot going on. And especially you see this around electoral cycles, because you see a lot of places, there's a lot of conflict and problems that haven't been resolved come up during the electoral cycles. And at this moment, the good officers' role we play is very key in avoiding sometimes full-blown conflict around these cycles. But there's a lot that we can share with you in terms of the work we do. There's also the support we give for capacity building, for mediation. So we've been training a lot of women, bringing up their skills in mediation rules, quite often at the very local level. And I think this is having an impact on the WPS agenda, an impact in terms of the prevention. We talked about early warning systems. So some of these actors need support in those fields as well. And then after the training, we continue to provide support to them and follow the activities. I think there was also a question about from Akim, deliberately, working on the tools. Yes, there's a lot of effort, but a lot also requires, and I'm glad we've heard from, talked about national prevention strategies. So the vision that member states will bring and the ownership of it is very important. So these tools are available and we're always ready to support, but then we need that commitment to come also from member states. So I'll just leave it there, but of course you're very welcome to have more discussions with us going forward. Well, I've just been passed a note. The independence of Namibia was a success story. I mean, if you go through the past, there's been a lot, anti-apartheid struggles and so on. So we've done quite a bit if you look at the 80 years span of the UN. But now, as I indicated in my statement, it's getting more and more difficult to make these gains. But then we have to continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ASG. ASG Pollier, you have the floor.
Thank you. And we'll try to address the question in relation to how to bring mediation into education. And I would say that three things we're already doing as a global community. And again, I think we need to be hopeful, and we also need to refer to that half full of the glass that is in our table, and not only to that half empty glass we also have in our table, because we're not going to change anything if we are not hopeful. I would say that in terms of member states, the framework of youth, peace and security, and member states establishing its own sovereign national action plans on peace building and the inclusion of young people in institutional life is definitely the way to continue to move. And in these last 10 years, there's been progress, but progress is not enough. And that's why it's critical that when we look into the ecosystem that the UN reflects, member states move forward on these commitments they have made at the same house. The second will be the whole UN admin bodies, from the Secretariat to every fund and program across the different mandates. We have a common vision and strategy to work with and for youth, which is the UN's youth strategy. And the focus of that strategy is to really build and strengthen the capacity at the country level, to really create that engagement of those young people in their countries, and how those efforts of the UN make sense to their day-to-day issues and are connected to the national development challenges of their countries. And the third important part, and I think this forum is a reflection of that, is really to create spaces in our intergovernmental structures to make this multilateral system to be more inclusive, to be more open, to receive questions, to receive criticism, and to build trust through participation with civil society, and especially with young people.
I'll use my brief moment actually to respond to the question of the Australian ambassador, because it sums up rather well the ICRC's position in this. I mean, as he asked how to protect the humanitarian track from a battle of narratives, in our understanding, it really comes down to the constellation of actors that are relevant in this space of conflict prevention, conflict resolution. And I say constellation in a very specific way because every actor plays its role, but every actor is in its own place. And we don't exchange rules and we don't mix our roles. In our role as the ICRC and in humanitarian actor, we keep our focus steadfastly on the human aspect, the humanitarian concerns, and put through the lens of any action that we're proposed or called upon to do of whether it actually ameliorates or reduces the human suffering. That's our role. It's not the mediator's role. The mediator's role is different. And in our role, we're in constant communication and dialogue with parties, with mediators, especially when it comes to implementation of peace agreements or of practical arrangements that are made between parties, because what the effective implementation of these depends upon is the operationalization, and we only through exchange among the different actors can we see that these steps are able to be walked forward and implemented. So we rely very much on this, and I would just bring down, if that's the role that we have to play as humanitarians, as other principled humanitarian actors would do, the call to states would then be to see also this constellation aspect and respect those roles, play theirs, but also work in this constellar approach. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this very interesting conversation. I think from what we've heard from our panelists, from the other interventions, is that there's no shortage of ideas, there's no shortage of strategies. And as people have noted, the attendance here today shows that there's no shortage of will to move forward, to create solutions that lead to sustainable peace. I would just say as a closing remark, when in times of challenge, when these challenges are so hard, so complicated, it feels at times hopeless. The most important thing is to take one step at a time. So I think everyone should reflect on what the next step is for them to make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you to all panelists for their concluding remarks. Now I invite Mr. Kamran Zafar, CEO of Global Peace Chain, for his brief vote of thanks. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, esteemed panelists, ladies and gentlemen. As we draw this timely and substantive discussion to a close, it is my distinct honor on the behalf of Global Peace Chain to extend our sincere appreciation to all those who have contributed to the success of today's high-level discussion on the United Nations Charter at 80, Reimagining Conflict Prevention and Resolution. We are deeply grateful to the permanent mission of Pakistan to United Nations, and in particular to His Excellency Ambassador Asim Iftikhar Ahmed for his thoughtful leadership and for convening this important discussion at a moment when renewed commitment to multilateralism is both necessary and urgent. I would also like to acknowledge Madam Saima Salim for her able moderation and for guiding the conversation with clarity and balance. I wish to extend my warm appreciation to our distinguished panelists for their insightful and forward-looking interventions. Your reflections have underscored the enduring relevance of United Nations Charter as the cornerstone of international peace and security. At Global Peace Chain, we respectfully encourage all member states to continue their efforts toward full and consistent adherence to the principles and purposes of United Nations Charter, including the peaceful settlement of disputes and the promotion of international law as a foundation for sustainable peace. In an increasingly complex global environment, strengthening cooperation and mutual trust remain essential. Global Peace Chain remains committed to supporting the work of United Nations and its member states by engaging constructively with all stakeholders. We stand ready to contribute where appropriate to inclusive peace-building initiatives, particularly in contexts affected by conflict and instability. We firmly believe that meaningful youth engagement, dialogue, and capacity building can serve as valuable complements to existing peace and security framework. Finally, I would like to thank all participants and partners for their presence and engagement today. Your participation reflects a shared dedication to dialogue, cooperation, and collective pursuit of peace. As we mark UN at 80, may today's discussion serve as a reaffirmation of our common responsibility to uphold multilateralism and to work together toward a more peaceful and sustainable world. Thank you very much.
Representative of Pakistan to the United Nations, Ambassador Asim Iftikhar Ahmed, for delivering closing remarks. So you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Saima. I will try not to be long, but I think just not to miss, because I think there was an important comment from our colleague from Haiti who invited us and in fact challenged us that we need to pay attention to Haiti. And then he asked how Haiti could be useful in this process. I would like to say that, I mean, we know Haiti and the people of Haiti, the kind of pride that they carry. And I would say that this is a challenging moment in which the people of Haiti have to remain steadfast and persevere in their quest for peace. And the international community and the Security Council is helping. And we hope that situation will improve. And we have seen that very difficult circumstances elsewhere. The UN's interventions and through prevention and peacekeeping and subsequently building peace through peace building have led to successful examples. Pakistan itself has contributed. Situations like Sierra Leone, Cote d'Ivoire, Liberia, Burundi, there are many. And in fact, we just had Sierra Leone in the Security Council. So from, a country that emerged from conflict was serving so proudly and constructively in the Security Council. So is Liberia now that has joined the Security Council. So we look forward to Haiti, in the same role. So I would like to uh, thank, and take good note of this strong interest that this discussion has generated, which is manifested by this great participation that everyone has noted. But at the very outset, to recall what was said, that we are facing highest number of conflicts globally, and the number has in fact doubled in 15 years, and there are many conflicts that are ongoing for more than 20 years. So this discussion's importance is highlighted in that context, and the interlinkages with the international humanitarian law were adequately brought forward in that context. So today's exchanges have basically reaffirmed a simple yet powerful truth. The Charter remains our most credible guide for preventing conflict and sustaining peace, but its promise can only be fulfilled through consistent and principled application. And we also heard that prevention was better than management. We'd just like to note some key takeaways from our discussion today. First, there is a clear and shared recognition that conflict prevention must once again be placed at the center of the UN's peace and security agenda. Because prevention is not an abstract ideal, it is a strategic necessity and a legal obligation under the Charter. And acting early is not only more humane and cost effective, it is also more faithful to the founding vision of the Charter. And as we heard, that this work matters, and it is cost effective, and it must be prioritized, as we heard from the Assistant Secretary General. And in that regard, the importance of enhancing capacities, in particular the mediation capacities, was highlighted. Secondly, our discussion underscored the enduring relevance of the peaceful settlement mechanisms under Chapter 6. And negotiation, mediation, all those tools, judicial settlement, are not secondary tools to be used when all else fails. They are, in fact, Charter's primary instruments for addressing disputes before they escalate. And we were also reminded of the importance of addressing the root causes for lasting peace. And it was also important to infuse confidence into these mechanisms so that the member states have confidence they can go to the UN and seek the utilization of these tools. So thirdly, Security Council Resolution 2788 emerged as a pivotal milestone. In this regard, it represents a landmark affirmation of preventive diplomacy and mediation at a time of deep geopolitical polarization. And it sent a clear and timely message that dialogue is not a concession, it is a charter obligation, and prevention is not optional, it is indispensable. And fourthly, I think the participants spoke candidly about the damage caused by the selective application of international law, whether in situations involving self determination or prolonged occupation or shared natural resources. When there is inconsistency, it erodes trust in multilateralism and weakens the authority of the Charter. So, disputes demand principled, impartial, and sustained engagement through charter based mechanisms and not political expediency. And as we were told, geopolitics cannot be excuse for inaction. And there were calls for risk tolerant approaches and for strengthening partnerships. Fifth, there was strong emphasis on the importance of inclusive approaches to peace, the meaningful participation of youth, women, civil society, and regional actors is not peripheral, it is essential for legitimacy, sustainability, and credibility of conflict prevention and resolution efforts. And in this regard, role of member states and effective leadership was emphasized because it was pointed out that it's not just enough to criticize, but we have to lead by example. And UN should be at the center stage and not sidelined. And it was also pointed out that the UN is doing a lot. Not everything is under the limelight. So the role of the UN, the role of the General Assembly was recalled. The need to strengthen the hands of the Secretary General and his team was emphasized. Whole of system approach, this importance was underlined. And yet it was also pointed out that it's not about one size fits all. We need specific solutions to specific issues, and then national policies. The importance of national policies and peace building was emphasized. Finally, our discussion recognized that innovation could strengthen prevention, including through early warning tools, data driven analysis, and partnerships. But such innovation must remain firmly anchored in international law, and new approaches must reinforce and not replace the Charter's foundational principles. So basically, colleagues, this discussion leaves us with an unmistakable conclusion. And the challenge before us is not a lack of norms or frameworks, but a gap between commitment and implementation. And reimagining conflict prevention does not require reinventing the Charter, it requires recommitting to it, applying it early, impartially, and without exception. And we have to keep trying. We must never give up. I extend, in closing, a sincere appreciation to our distinguished panelists for their insightful and thoughtful contributions, to all participants for their engagement and for your contribution, and also to the Global Peace Chain for being our partners in this event, and the very strong and diverse participation that you have mobilized for this event. We have colleagues from different nationalities. It has turned out to be a truly multinational event. So I congratulate you on that. With that, I would like to conclude and thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.